Hello everyone, and welcome to Possessed Radio. I'm your host Steven, and thanks for tuning in. In today's chilling tale, we explore strange cultures, missing persons, and ghastly entities. A story that teaches us that a calm demeanor and confident tone can convince just about anyone of our innocence. Except, of course, for ourselves. This inaugural story was written by me some years ago, and any feedback is appreciated. So please enjoy. I'm a religious anthropologist searching for a gate to hell. I awoke this morning the same way I do every day, at 7:06 a.m. to the deafening sound of a gunshot. I'm torn from my slumber in a cold sweat, overcome by an intense feeling of dread with a hint of déjà vu. My head was pounding from the previous night's whiskey, and I felt both buzzed and hungover. I carefully dodged the dozens of files and religious texts scattered across my floor, stepping on the occasional article of dirty clothing. My kitchen was loaded with dirty dishes. The fridge was barren aside from the last sip of bourbon I had been saving for just such an occasion. I wasn't sure if I was hungry or nauseous, but the last bitter sip of alcohol seemed to help, at least at the time. My lecture was in less than 2 hours, and I had an image to maintain. I'm a cultural anthropologist, and I specialize in studies focused on obscure religious groups. I have observed large-scale organizations, theorized the meanings of vague biblical texts, interviewed followers of cults, and even pursued those the world views as devil worshippers. The latter is what simultaneously made my career, and also what ruined my life. My career typically doesn't garner much attention. Few are concerned with how most of the world lives aside from their immediate social circle. An out of sight, out of mind mentality. So I had an idea to draw some attention my way. Instead of publishing my research in databases only perused by fellow colleagues, I turned my work over to the internet. It took about 6 months before I had the hang of it. The key was in the thumbnail and the tags. An image of some savage-looking native, or maybe hinting at some dark rituals performed in solitude in the woods. Occasionally, my crew would even just do a vlog about the locales we visit. A perfect excuse to have a thumbnail of my camera woman on the beach in her bikini. If you haven't figured it out yet, I'm not exactly the most ethical man, but I am the most driven. The average person may hide behind the veil of suburban life, but what he truly craves to see is sex and bloodshed. I'm not above capitalizing on either. The past 2 weeks have been hard, though. I had just arrived back home after observing a few different religious groups in the Middle East. My team had a falling out, and I wasn't sure what I would do next. I crave success, though, and the lecture earlier today was a total act of desperation. Despite my genuine apathy towards most things, I've always been able to put on a good show. I can turn on my charisma when I need to, with just the right amount of arrogance and humor to keep my audience engaged. The YouTube comments say cocky prick pretty often, but the views just keep going up. Maybe it's my jokes about the locales and the people. Presenting in my profession with zero religious beliefs has given me a ton of material to work with. I led into my presentation with confidence and a strong hook. I decided to get the young, impressionable minds of Miskatonic University intrigued on the promise of controversy. I spoke of the ancient religions of the Middle East and Babylon and Assyria. I mentioned the god Pazuzu of William Peter Blatty's Exorcist fame. I spoke of harsh codes and unheard of beliefs to the Western world. My focus was mainly on the Yazidi people, commonly misconstrued as devil worshippers and persecuted for years because of it. I could see their eyes go glassy at the thought of demons and how they hungered for more. They were engrossed and curious to learn. I only hoped they would become future subscribers. As expected, the seminar ended with rounds of questions, ranging from the specifics of cult beliefs to modern-day blood rituals. Since it was a college campus, I of course was faced with a few politically correct sticklers, upset with my open stance against religion and my willingness to state it at the expense of those who believed otherwise. My favorite question was, "These people you study have practiced these views for centuries. They give years of their lives devoted to these ideals and their ancestors died for them. How would you feel knowing that after you died, your beliefs were mercilessly ridiculed?" It was a fair question that I was all too accustomed to. The answer to that is rather simple, though. I won't feel anything. I'll be dead. That got quite the rise out of the crowd. Thunderous applause had echoed throughout the auditorium as I took my last question of the day. A question which admittedly caught me off guard. I was speaking with a few of your colleagues recently and learned of your endeavors with the Yaduni tribe in the mountains of Afghanistan. They spoke of witnessing a demonic entity. They claimed you suffered a mental breakdown. What exactly did you see? The older gentleman in the black suit asked with the calmest demeanor. I'm sure the look on my face was priceless, as it wasn't too often that someone left me speechless. My research has landed me in debates across the globe, and I'm typically able to BS my way through any conflict of wit. This time was personal, though. This man clearly had an agenda. Sir, I applaud you on your knowledge of my research. As for my former colleagues, I'm afraid you've been misinformed. My team has been in a bit of strife as of late, and we aren't seeing eye to eye. I'm not surprised by the slander. I tried to deter this situation with my usual confident tone. The man wasn't satisfied with my answer and stood for his reply. Since one of your team didn't make it home, they feel very firmly on their stance. I ask you once more, did you truly witness some sort of evil? The students, who I hoped would have lost interest by now, were more intrigued than ever. I was frozen on stage, thinking back to my trip to that godforsaken desert. In an act of desperation, I pled with the man. I really respect your level of fascination with my work. Stick around after, and when the dust clears, I'll take you to lunch, discuss it further. I'll show you my appreciation of your support. The man looked around the room slowly, giving the slightest nod. Murmurs broke forth around the auditorium, and my anger began to fester. As the crowd finally began to vacate, I spoke one last time. Before you go, I'd like to say in respect to my new friend here, I have seen evil, but not in any demon or spirit. Evil exists in abundance, but only in man. Thank you for your time. I sat in a secluded corner of the bar. The dim light swung overhead slowly with a flicker as I sipped my third whiskey. Before I could finish it off, a hand pulled the glass away. I was pretty fired up from the lecture and quickly rose to my feet in contempt. Settle down, Jeremy. It's just me, said my former professor, Dr. Castor. He taught some of my theology and sociology classes back before I had any success. Stuck his neck out for me plenty too, since I had a habit of getting myself in trouble. He always said my genius would land me in hot water, and he wasn't exactly wrong either. Dr. Castor took his seat across from me to voice his concerns. He didn't like the bags under my eyes, or my willingness to drink so early in the day. He seemed sincere, but those pleasantries were nothing more than a ruse. I knew what he really wanted. Cut this shit. You want to know about Afghanistan. He gave the slightest eyebrow raise with an unconvincing nod of indifference. I remained silent until he quit playing dumb. I apologize, my boy. I've heard things. Tiffany and Derek went their separate ways. Tanya never made it home, and you... I looked up from my drink with fire in my eyes. And I spent the last 2 days trying to get my head straight. That part is true. Castor pressed me for more knowledge in exchange for the tab I was planning on skyrocketing. Now, Afghanistan was supposed to be a standard affair. We go, shoot the desert, some ruins, a few people who practice some long-dead religion that seems to catch the attention of millions of God-fearing Westerners. What we found instead, though, was something truly interesting. An unidentified sect of what I can only identify as theistic Satanism. Or, in layman's terms, true worship of the devil as an entity. Your average Satanist isn't really that thrilling. They tend to be harmless people with alternate views on life. They don't actually worship demons or even a central deity in any sense. As with most obscure topics, the media runs wild with ways to make them controversial. Finding a group of individuals who truly do worship some type of evil deity, though, that's something special. My associate and expert linguist Derek made the discovery while we frequented a small village in the desert. We followed the tips in exchange for some cash and made our way deeper in. I stayed back with Tanya and Tim when Derek first made contact. We heard dozens of rumors about their strict codes and what was permitted when speaking with outsiders. so we thought it best to leave negotiations to him. After an hour or so of what looked to be desperate conversation with 3 elders of the small tribe, Derek waved us over. Overall, the tribe wasn't that much different than any other mountain-dwelling people. They were nomadic, relying on the portability of their yurts and herds of goat for survival. They slaughtered the animals and let little go to waste. Their diets may be shocking to Westerners, but in the scheme of things, it was fairly typical when looking at other tribes such as the Kyrgyz. We spent 2 days among their people under the watchful eye of Tanya and her camera. Tiffany did her research and communicated with the masses online. I mostly wrote scripts while narrating the scenes. Derek helped me communicate with the nomads themselves so I could avoid a long-winded game of charades. We shared meals, water, and even a few laughs over the next few days. But we weren't really getting the footage we needed. For a group of people the locals back in town feared, the Yaduni seemed fairly harmless. In terms of religious practice, they dropped to their knees 3 times per day to pray. Not in the direction of Mecca, but seemingly the sun. The scripture carried by the elders was not a Bible, Quran, or Torah. The large tattered book was lined with a pale, fleshy tone, which undoubtedly was made from some animal years ago. I tried to peek at the book a few times, but it was closely guarded by the elders. The one time I could see within its pages, I was at a complete loss. Not even because I can only read English, but the characters themselves were completely foreign to me. I've traveled the world to meet with dozens of peoples, speaking dozens of languages. Never once had I seen such symbols. Derek and I had an argument on the 3rd day of shooting. I voted we head back to civilization since we had no decent footage of anything shocking or disturbing. Derek was adamant we stay since he was under the impression that the holy day of this tribe fell on Wednesday. I was the face of this operation and disliked the idea of my authority being challenged, but I reluctantly gave in. We had until Thursday, and not a second longer. When Wednesday hit, I swallowed my pride. Derek was right. Tiffany pulled me from my yurt at dawn down to a crowd at the Yaduni. Derek and Tanya were already on scene filming as the youngest members of the tribe danced in a circle around a trio of goats. The elders chanted from their worn texts while 3 women approached the animals. I looked on in confusion as I reached into my pocket for my flask. The goats writhed briefly as the women let the blood from their throats. By mid-afternoon, every member of the tribe was marked by what seemed to be the equivalent of a priest in goat's blood. A strange symbol marked their foreheads. It almost looked like an X with a semicircle over top of it. I could only imagine it may have been symbolic for the sun, the direction they seemed to pray. By nightfall, the Yaduni returned to their yurts for sleep as my team did. We saw an interesting ceremony, undoubtedly caught on camera for the first time. Though I was disappointed there was no actual dark worship, I looked forward to documenting our findings back home. I dozed off that night as happy as I had ever been. That happiness wouldn't last long, though. It was dark when Tiffany woke me. She told me that we needed to leave immediately, to grab as much water as we could. I was confused in a half-woken stupor. I grabbed a few bottles and rushed out the door by her side. She carefully ran behind the barren yurts, and I was curious as to where the Yaduni were. She urged me to stay low as we followed alongside a small trail behind the jagged edge of an imposing incline. I hugged the rocks while my eyes fixated on my footing. Eventually, the width of the path became less perilous, and I dropped to a knee when I saw that we had met with Derek. I tried to question them on what was going on, only to be instantly shushed by Tiffany. Derek pointed over the rocks beside me with a finger over his mouth. To my shock, I witnessed the Yaduni dancing and chanting around a lone pyre, surrounded by 3 more goats. The foreign symbol was written in the blood-soaked sand all around. That's when my heart sank. Tanya wasn't with us. I could hear her screams come from the grisly scene before us as she writhed against 2 men pulling her towards the pyre. The last thing I remember from that day was screaming. I awoke in a hospital some miles away in solitude. How I got there, I don't know. My calls to Tiffany and Derek were met with hostility and contempt. Whatever events transpired that night had cost Tanya her life, and me my career. After explaining to Dr. Castor I had no recollection of the exact events, and not to repeat my tale, he put his hand on my shoulder. That's quite the ordeal. I'm sure it was just the stress of the danger that got to you. I know you would have done what you could to have saved her. I stared at my drink in silence. I'm well aware I did what I could. With that outburst, Castor made a hasty exit, and I rubbed my eyes. I had to hold it together after all. I had another meeting. Roughly 15 minutes later, the older man from the conference arrived. He took Castor's previous seat with a file folder clutched in his hands. Hello, Jeremy. I wanted to apologize about earlier, he said with a quivering, outstretched hand. I glared at his friendly gesture, followed by a sharp retort. Let's get one thing straight, old man. I don't believe in a cosmic scoreboard, right and wrong, or heaven and hell. So if you try to humiliate me again, I will put you in the fucking ground. The man sat in silence, motionless until the waitress passed by. He shook his head at the chance to have a drink and apprehensively put the folder on the table. I'm Joseph Jacobs. Jeremy, again, I do apologize. I had to get your attention. My daughter has gone missing, and I need your help to find her. My glance hadn't grown any friendlier, although I was intrigued. Have you gone to the cops? I look into people who believe in diverse things. I'm not a private investigator. The man said nothing as he handed me two pictures from the folder, one of his daughter, and the other of the strange symbol I had seen back in the Middle East. I had a pain in my chest as my heart raced and the feelings of anxiety overtook me. Where did you get this? Why did you bring this to me? As I would soon find out, Tiffany and Derek split up after Afghanistan. Neither would return my calls, but they had no problem publishing their findings on some hastily made wiki page. After all, I was the only one with the information to the YouTube channel, and it seems that in the chaos, Tanya's camera was lost. What they did manage to post was a recollection of some strange, winged creature. They claimed it manifested from the ashes of our colleague and soared through the sky immediately after. What caught Mr. Jacobs' attention, though, was the symbol they recreated on the page. Both of your former associates are looking into matters elsewhere, and I have no one else to turn to. This is the same symbol that you encountered overseas. I'm afraid my daughter has fallen into some sort of trouble. How long has she been gone? Where did she encounter these symbols? I pushed Jacobs further. Jacobs wiped a bead of sweat from his brow with a shaky hand. My daughter's an addict, and fell into the wrong crowd some time ago. People talk about an old abandoned apartment complex off a division. Junkies go to shoot up there, and teens go to worship the devil, they say. Most people in the area believe it's a gate to hell. I don't put too much stock into that, though. Or at least I didn't until now. Jacobs handed me another picture, this time a picture of the old complex which he spoke of. It was a dilapidated 3-floor building filled with broken windows, chipped paint, and graffiti markings nearly half of the square footage. What caught my eye, though, was that the graffiti was in fact the symbol of the Yaduni. Fear gripped me for a moment as my head began to ache. For a second I swore I could almost hear Tanya's cries, and I felt like I could remember something. The pain in my head grew sharper, and I decided to gulp down another drink than relive another possible horror. My business is in a period of dismay, and I need to rebuild. In order to stay on top, I need something big, an angle. I will go speak to the people in the apartment complex on one condition that is non-negotiable. No matter how gruesome the outcome, I get full rights to exclusively publish this story. Jacobs put his head in his hands and sighed. He reached forward once more, and this time I took his hand. He gave me what information he had and began to make his exit. Before you go, why haven't the cops looked? I asked. They claim they have. They said it's a condemned building and nobody's in there. I drove by just yesterday. There's dozens of cars out front and I can hear the music. They never looked, he stated with a noticeable amount of frustration in his voice. After I sobered up, I made my way back to campus to the sociology department to speak to Castor. I suppose that I owed him an apology. I opened the door to his office, to which I could hear him mutter, "Please come in, Jeremy." He never even looked up from the paper he was grading. I'm sorry, man. It's been a rough couple weeks," I explained. Castor gave me a subtle smile. "It's okay, son. I'm worried about you, though. Are you sure you can't remember anything else that happened?" My head pounded once more as I tried to think back to that night. I could remember the glow of flames and the echoing screams, and something else for a brief moment made me think I was on the verge of an epiphany. Finally, in a calm voice, I said, "No, not a thing. I do have a question for you, though. What are your beliefs on hell?" Castor's head tilted back and forth as he adjusted himself in his chair. "Well, there's thousands of beliefs on hell. Some Jewish faiths believe that hell is temporary, maybe a year or so of punishment to cleanse sins. Most Christians think eternal hellfire and torment. Others think you relive every last mistake you ever made with a permanent sense of guilt. Some say it's complete isolation, nothing but darkness and loneliness. And some people yet may even tell you that hell is cyclic, your own worst nightmare playing over and over. As for me, I don't believe in hell. Please, Jeremy, what's on your mind?" I didn't answer him. I just shook his hand and left. Maybe it's best that even I don't know what's on my own mind anymore. I left my apartment around midnight to go check out the Waitley apartment complex. Although the police clearly don't go inside, it didn't mean I couldn't be arrested for trespassing in the parking lot. When I pulled up, the site was just as the photograph I saw earlier. The grounds were littered with broken glass, chipped wood, and cans of spray paint. I tiptoed my way around all the tetanus on the cracked sidewalk leading up to the door. An overgrowth of shrubs made the entrance narrow, which I found quite curious. If so many people were regularly in here, how had the bushes not permanently been skewed to the side? In fact, there were no other vehicles out front at all, and I never saw a light or heard so much as a single note of music. What I could see, though, was the symbol of the Yaduni, marking the walls, ceiling, and floors in red spray paint. I was apprehensive at the thought of continuing further, but I couldn't afford to lose another groundbreaking chance at footage. I could never go back to my hometown defeated. I made my way down the hall cautiously. The loose tiles beneath my feet shifted frequently, and the paint chipped from the walls beneath my fingers. I ducked regularly below dangling light fixtures and cobwebs. The first door on my right was that of the office. It was barren aside from an old desk with a mid-90s computer monitor. I opened the drawers to find nothing more than spiders. As I continued my exploration, I grew too comfortable in my surroundings. I heard a crash in the distance that put me back on guard as I instinctively put the desk between myself and the doorway. It may have been minutes or an hour, but either way, I was frozen with my back to the wall until I finally talked myself into continuing further. I peeked my head out into the hallway, though, making no sight of anything at all. The blue glow of my penlight illuminated the hallway as I pushed further from the entrance, which still maintained some light from the moon. As I passed countless rooms with no signs of life, some had furniture strewn about, others the ceiling was collapsing into. A few were even barricaded so that I could barely open the doors at all. On occasion, I could see syringes and makeshift pipes on the ground, so perhaps Jacobs wasn't wrong after all. An hour had passed and I began to grow bored. Drug addicts may have called this place home at one point, but not now. I had nearly convinced myself to leave when I thought back to the fight with Derek. Maybe I should check out one more floor before I go just to be sure. I made my way down the hall, following the once illuminated exit signs hanging from the ceiling. The staircase was pitch black, with a railing that could clearly support no weight at all. The rubber grip on the steps was all but worn, and the light fixture was shattered all over the ground. I cautiously rounded the steps to the next level when I caught the glimpse of something. I'm not sure if it was a person or an animal, but whatever it was, it ran. I could hear the door close on the exit of the next flight of stairs. I shouted, "Miss Jacobs!" There was no response, so I bolted after the figure. My burst of energy was short-lived. As I hit the apex of the steps, I stared at the door in front of me. Painted in red letters was a simple message. "Do not enter. Hell inside." The message was bounded on either side by the symbol of the Uduni. I reminded myself for a moment that hell didn't exist, but I couldn't shake the idea that violent fanatics do. I slowly turned the rusted handle to the second floor and was shocked to see that everything looked normal. The walls were freshly painted. The lights hung in proper orientation and worked, and the tiles on the floor were neatly maintained. I stared in confusion at my surroundings before remembering my task at hand. I could make out the figure of a woman ahead and the sounds of sobbing. I quickly ran after to a room at the end of the hallway. I reached for the door handle and quickly retracted my grasp. The handle was hot. That's when she spoke. "Please, help me. I'm trapped inside. They're after me." A strange sense of familiarity overtook me as I thought back to my time in the mountains. I had to save her. I covered my hand with my sleeve and turned the handle, but the door wouldn't budge. I slammed my shoulder into the door over and over until I was violently thrown backwards. The explosion was deafening and left me completely disoriented. Dozens of frequencies screeched in my ears as I struggled to move with the searing pain of the burns which covered my body. How could I be so stupid? I tried to sit up when a loud screech echoed throughout the complex. When I finally regained stable vision, I thought I could see something fly overhead at an insane speed. By the time I regained my feet, I realized that the entire floor was engulfed in flame. I tried to stay low. Burns hurt, but smoke inhalation kills. I crawled into the room, wincing in pain with every last movement on the hot tile. I wanted to shout for help, but my cries were with my mouth tucked tightly into my shirt. I could find no trace of the girl, alive or dead. After a painful minute of crawling throughout the room, I altered my focus to self-preservation. I tried my best to make it back to the doorway. But despite my best efforts, it just wasn't there. I began to panic and I grew lightheaded. The pressure on my chest was unbelievable as the imminent realization of danger took hold. My face tingled due to lack of oxygen. The only thing keeping me awake was the god-awful heat which singed every part of my body. Worst of all, though, was that creature. I could hear wings flapping above me and shrouded in the deep veil of smoke. My frenzied crawling seemed to last an eternity. I woke up sometime later in a decrepit room. There were no signs of burns on my body or the building. Had I taken a break from my search and dozed off? Had I been drugged at the bar? In any case, I had to get my bearings and find a way out. My search for Jacob's daughter was at a close. The room I was in was completely empty. A single lamp illuminated a lone door on the far wall. I tapped the handle carefully this time to check for heat. I opened the door to find myself in the second room. I was confused by the layout, but I thought maybe it was like a hotel where adjacent rooms also share a door. This room was completely black and had a window facing back into the room I had just come from that I had not noticed before. I walked towards the window in confusion. I peered through it to see two men and a woman inside. The room was now well lit, despite the lack of any substantial ceiling fixture. I crouched beside the window to stay out of sight. I cringed as the scene before me unfolded. The woman screamed as one of the men began beating her over and over. The second man backed away towards the window with his phone in hand. He was shaking as he recorded the scene. I rushed back over to the door, but it wasn't there. I stood frozen, staring at the wall. I was disgusted that someone could idly sit by and do nothing. I pounded on the window. "Let me in. You've got to help her. Put the damn phone down and help her." I cried and pleaded as I slammed my fist against the window over and over. My rage grew with every strike the woman withstood until I finally could see the window begin to crack. Suddenly, the man who recorded the scene slowly lowered his phone and turned to face me. A shadow was cast over much of his face, but I could make out a ghastly grin that seemed to mark the entirety of it. I couldn't hear him, but I could see that he was laughing hysterically, and his face shook with some uncontrollable tremor. He stood toward the window, and I quickly backed into the wall. As his face came into view, I crashed to the floor. Because his face was mine. I threw my hands over my eyes and screamed, "Stay away! This isn't happening! I wouldn't do that!" When I relinquished my grip of my face, I realized I was alone in the dark. I scurried to my feet, ready to defend myself against whatever entity I had just faced. My pen light shined brightly, but no matter what direction it faced, there appeared to be no walls in sight. I could see no ceilings, no doors. I could hardly make out the debris on the floor. I wandered forward, cautiously praying I wouldn't bump into anything else. I picked up the pace because I could have sworn I heard the wings flapping behind me once more. At first slow and subtle, then more frantic and proximal. I sprinted wildly through the black abyss, crying and screaming. I could hear the cries echoing back to me off some distant, unseen walls. Every so often, though, the cries that returned to me weren't my own. Cries of anguish from 1,000 other voices of men and women of all ages which were hardly distinguishable. All except for one voice. The voice of Tanya. "Jeremy, help me!" I tripped on the ground in exhaustion. My lungs burned as I shouted once more, "It's not my fault!" The beating of wings grew louder and louder until they had to be mere feet away. When it stopped, the voices finally fell silent. I looked up from the ground to see a lone chair before a static-filled TV. Something drew me towards it. I took my seat on the hard plastic and watched as the static seemed to transform into actual images. I could see myself sleeping in the yurt. Tiffany entered, her face covered in tears, telling me that we need to leave. She expects me to grab all the water I can, but instead, I grab the camera. I watch as we scurry along the mountainside. She is in a frenzy of emotions, but the only one I feel is curiosity. We finally stop when we reach Derek. He's clutching a rifle, and his face is ghostly white. I look down the ridge towards the scene below. Tanya is being dragged by 2 of the Yaduni towards a wooden pyre, while the rest of the tribe chants and dances fanatically. I'm recording the whole thing. Tiffany is pulling at my arm, and I push her away. Derek lines up the shot. He's a former rifleman. He won't miss. That's when I clutch the firearm and wrestle with him on the ground. In the chaos, we both lose our grip and the weapon plummets down the mountain behind us. I quickly dive for the camera, but Derek is faster. He smashes it to pieces on the ground. But I'm too preoccupied by the scene below to care anymore. The pyre shines bright as the flames ascend to the sky. Tanya lets out an anguished cry. Shortly after, she stops writhing. Somehow the sky grows darker, and the symbols which have stained the sand and the blood glow an eerie red. From beneath the ashes, like some sort of demonic phoenix, a bizarre entity rises. It has legs and arms with wings as black as night. The head of a raven tops the creature, and the Yaduni chant in unison. Avuzu. The creature takes to the sky, clutching one of the tribe. My scientific mind is stunned and I fall backwards in terror. Derek and Tiffany stay quiet until the nomads travel once more. They radio for help, leaving me behind. The sight on the TV was agonizing. What had I done? I sacrificed a friend for my 15 minutes and damned myself in the process. I don't know what type of creature that was. All I know is that it stalks my nightmares, and my memory is clear now. A light finally flickered on in this abandoned place. It shines down directly onto a nearby table. I approach it to find Derek's rifle. I'm not sure how long I've been in this place. All I know is I can't take the sound of those wings any longer. If you find this recording, leave this place. There is nothing but anguish here in this gate to hell. I awoke this morning the same way I do every day. At 7:06 a.m., to the deafening sound of a gunshot. I am torn from my slumber in a cold sweat, overcome by an intense feeling of dread, with a hint of deja vu.